Over the last 2 years, I've made it my mission to try every popular mountain bike brake to figure out which is the overall best. I did another video comparing the Hayes Dominion, TRP DHR Evo, and Magura MT7, and now we're trying out the best that the UK has to offer, the Hope Tech 4 V4s. These are beautifully machined and promise some insane power. We also tried them with these crazy Hope vented rotors that are unlike anything we've ever seen before. In this video, I'm going to cover all the tech in the Hope Tech 4 V4s and share my long-term performance review. Plus, we'll compare them to some other popular brake contenders at the very end, so stay tuned for that. Hey guys, my name's Tor, and before we talk brakes, you need to know that we carry these brakes and everything else that you want for your bike at thelostco.com. We have a ton of components in stock here right now, and we spend all day shipping out new parts to riders just like you. If you need help figuring out which parts to get, our customer service is the best around. So give us a call, send us an email if you need a mountain bike therapist to talk to. Hope is one of the few companies that manufactures all of their products in-house with rows and rows of CNC machines cutting brake calipers, pedals, stems, and like pretty much everything else you're gonna bolt to your bike. But today, we're gonna focus on these beautiful 4-piston Hope Tech 4 V4 brakes and some specialty rotors that look nothing like any other mountain bike rotor that's come through this shop. Both are real works of art that would look right at home in like any modern art gallery, but this is obviously a bike shop, so we're gonna get them dirty after doing a super quick tech breakdown on the Tech 4 V4s. The name Tech 4 V4 comes from the Tech 4 lever, which is used in these brakes, and it's also used in the Tech 4 E4 and Tech 4 X2 brakes from Hope, and the V4 caliper has always been used in Hope's highest performance 4-piston brake. Inside the very nondescript packaging, you'll find a set of brakes with not much else. You won't find a single Hope logo anywhere on or in the box besides on the brakes or a little pamphlet, which I love. Every other brake we carry has Apple-ified their packaging with elaborate cardboard structures to hold the brake perfectly. So the logos are out when you open the box and everything's just right. Whereas Hope just tosses them in there with some extra brake pads and some hardware to shorten the lines and says, have fun. I've got the boring black brakes on my bike, but they also come in all the classic Hope colors you can expect, with incredibly high quality anodizing, so the colors are gonna pop super loud and they won't fade over time. We've also got the standard brake hose spec here, but Hope also offers a braided steel hose that's more durable than a standard brake line. The steel lines should also give a firmer lever feel because they won't expand as much as the standard black hoses, but the black hoses treated me just fine, and I never really felt the need to upgrade. I did actually manage to rip a hose out of the lever during a crash, but I think that would have happened regardless of the hose material because the hose itself never actually ripped, it just got yanked out of the lever when my bars got all spun around. Installing the Tech 4 lever is just as easy as you'd hope. There's a hinge-style clamp, so you don't have to slide your grips and shifter off, and Hope also offers adapters for Matchmaker, iSpec, and transmission shifters so that you can get maximum aero with the single clamp on your bars. Down at the caliper, it's no surprise that it's also machined from a single block of aluminum rather than 2 pieces bolted together. Magura has a similar one-piece caliper construction, and the idea is that they're making the caliper more rigid, which is going to give you a more responsive overall brake feel. All over the caliper are some little cooling fins that help with cooling, and we highly recommend getting Hope brake adapters for those calipers because all the other ones I've tried just don't work. The body of the caliper doesn't really look any bigger than any other brake calipers, but the way that the mounting points are arranged just doesn't seem to play so nice with non-Hope branded brake adapters. I did get away with using a SRAM adapter with some custom clearancing from a grinder for a bit, but these calipers will not directly fit without using Hope specific brake adapters. Inside of that caliper, you got 2 16mm and 2 18mm stainless steel pistons, and the piston size is actually the only difference between Hope's very similarly named Tech 4 V4 and Tech 4 E4 brakes. The E4 brakes have 4 16mm pistons in each caliper, producing slightly less power than the V4s and at a slightly lighter weight, and I personally would gladly trade a few grams for a little bit more power. The adjustments on the Tech 4 lever are super user-friendly with 2 screws controlling the reach and the bite point. These are the same adjustments you're going to find on most brakes like the Mavens or the Dominions, but to me the Hope adjustments are way more intuitive because you can see exactly how the mechanism is working in the lever as you're using them. Those little screws push against different parts of the brake lever body to change where the lever blade sits, and you can watch them work while you spin them. The reach adjust tunes where the lever blade sits at rest, and the contact adjust tunes where the lever blade bottoms out and the brake starts engaging. We usually only bring up the concept of crosstalk in the context of suspension adjustments, but these 2 lever adjustments definitely have crosstalk, and whenever you want to adjust one, you're also going to adjust the other one because they kind of influence each other. The lever blade itself is pretty huge, and it feels noticeably flatter and wider against my finger than any other brake I've tried. When I actually got the calipers out and like measured the levers, their maximum width isn't that much longer than the others, but it's way more squared off and filled out compared to some more rounded off brake levers, which translates to a pretty different feel on my brake finger. The levers are also noticeably longer than other options, aiming to give a little bit more leverage and more power than a shorter lever. With all that brake lever real estate, you could also conceivably use 2 fingers on the lever, but with how much power these have, I don't really think you're gonna need to do that. You can, 1 finger's plenty with these guys. And an added bonus of the Tech 4 levers is that they don't have any play at all, and they make a really satisfying sound when you flick them. The lever pull on the Tech 4 is super light, but isn't quite as much of a hair trigger as the Hayes Dominion A4. Redesigned for less friction than the previous generation Tech 3 brake lever, it's got roller bearings and updated seals, and it's still a lighter pull than other options like SRAM codes or TRPs, and is way lighter than the Maven brake lever. You also won't find that Shimano or Magura hump in the lever travel, and Hope's lever throw is linear from start to finish. I think that's exactly what gives a brake good modulation, something that the Tech 4 V4 has plenty of. But we're going to talk more about all the specifics of that in the review section. When you bottom out the brake lever, there's a responsive bite, giving tons of power right when you hit that bite point. As you pull against the bottomed out brake, it'll move a little bit deeper into the travel, but not too much. As long as you've got a high quality bleed, the V4s have an impressively consistent bite point no matter how hard you're yanking on them. The Tech 4 V4s actually share the same brake pad shape with one of the other brakes that always gets mentioned in the comment section, the Trick Stuff Maxima. There's 3 different pad compounds included in the box: race, e-bike, and organic, with the race pads already installed in the caliper. All 3 of these brake pads are actually resin pads with different mixtures of organic and metallic compounds, but since I'm riding bikes in the Pacific Northwest, I pretty much only run sintered brake pads because they work way better and last way longer than organic pads when it's wet out, and it rains like every other day here. But if you're from Southern California or Texas or somewhere where it just doesn't rain that much, all of these organic pads are a pretty sweet bonus to find in the box. Bleed process. Just like all other Hope brakes, the Tech 4 V4s use DOT fluid rather than a mineral oil. I've been using Maxima DOT 4 fluid without any issues, but any DOT 4 or DOT 5.1 fluid like SRAM or whatever else you have should work just fine. There's a huge reservoir right on the top of the brake lever, which makes it super moto and sets it apart from other mountain bike brakes. Pulling the lid off the brake lever reveals the brake fluid, and to bleed these brakes, you don't actually even need a bleed kit. As far as I know, there aren't any other brakes that don't use a bleed kit, and all you need to set up the Hopes is a T10 torque wrench to open up the lever and an 8mm wrench to open the caliper port. To move bubbles through the system, I used a simple gravity bleed, opening the top of the lever and the caliper bleed port with a hose attached to keep everything clean. As the fluid drains and flows down through the system, you just need to keep an eye on the fluid at the top of the reservoir to make sure you're not sucking any air in, which I managed to do the first couple times that I was bleeding these brakes, which it totally resets your progress because it just inserts a bunch of air into the system. But Hope does make this machined aluminum cup that solves this problem, letting you get way more fluid through the system before topping things off. And that little cup definitely makes things a lot easier if you've got a goldfish brain like mine and you just forget to fill up the fluid at the top. To do a really thorough bleed and purge dirt and grime out of the system, I actually used a car brake bleeding technique, right? Open the caliper port, squeeze the lever, close the caliper port, and then release the brake lever, and do that a bunch of times. When doing a gravity bleed, the fluid and air bubbles move through the lines, but they just kind of flow around anything inside the lines, and you actually have to force out the dirt that gets in there by pumping the lever like I was talking about. After about a year of consistent riding on the Tech 4 V4s, it was definitely time to refresh the fluid, and there is a fair amount of crap that was in there, but not any more than I'd expect from any other brakes that I'd used for a whole year. Overall, as an amateur mechanic, I feel confident getting a solid bleed on these brakes without any crazy tricks or black magic, and I would definitely say that these brakes are overall user-friendly. The only bummer about bleeding these brakes is that putting the master cylinder lid back on will pretty much always spill DOT fluid. That's just a part of the design of these brakes, and if you're not spilling over a little bit when you put the lid back on, you do actually still have some bubbles in the system. So make sure you're ready with a rag, or else your shifter is gonna lose its factory finish after getting doused in brake fluid like mine. A more professional mechanic like Alex here at the Losco is gonna have a super clean bleed procedure, but if it's your first time doing this, just be ready for a little bit of spillage, and then you're not gonna have any problems. Just have a little rag ready to catch all the fluid. So what are these crazy rotors I was talking about earlier? They're actually Hope's vented rotors. They're 3.3 millimeters thick, and they're kind of this weird secret that it seems like Hope and the bike industry is keeping from us. I was doing some research on these for the video, and I couldn't find anything online about them except for this YouTube video from like 10 years ago about some dude unboxing them. So apparently they've been around forever, and no one's really talked about them since then. But let's talk about these brake rotors. Visually, these rotors look like a double stuffed Oreo. And like I said, these are 3.3 millimeters thick, which is 43% thicker than TRP's rotors, 65% thicker than SRAM's HS2 rotors. And just like Hope's classic floating rotors, these vented rotors have a CNC'd aluminum centerpiece with a stainless steel braking surface connected by these floating mounts. The idea with the floating rotor is that the braking surface can get hot and expand and take up that little extra bit of space between it and the center of the rotor, and that keeps it from warping. Also, aluminum is a little bit lighter than steel, making it for an overall lighter rotor than if it was just pure steel. But unsurprisingly, these rotors are still the heaviest that I've ever seen, weighing in at 292 grams in the 220 size and 250 grams in the 203 size. And these are the only two sizes that they're offered in right now. Because the rotors are quite a bit larger than anything else out there, they only work with Hope's V4 caliper, and V4 is actually printed right here on the rotor, just in case you forget. Vented rotors are super niche in mountain biking, but they've actually been around since Porsche invented them back in the 60s, and Hope's iteration of them have little fins between the braking surfaces to hold them together and let air flow right between them. With twice as much surface area, Hope's vented rotors get way more ventilation and airflow than other rotors. Hope's done a whole bunch of dyno testing in their secret labs, and they've got these things glowing hot, and they say that this keeps the vented rotors 15% cooler than their standard single rotor, but I found that number to be a little bit on the conservative side. So now let's jump into the actual review of the Hope Tech 4 V4s and vented rotors to see how these brakes performed on the trail. The conversation of brakes always comes back to power, and if that's all that we're looking for, then the Hope Tech 4 V4s are up there with the best of them. With some of the biggest pistons in the game, the massive power shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and when you pair them with my preferred sinter pads, there was always plenty of power when it was wet, dry, snowy, cold, hot, dusty. It didn't matter. I've been using these brakes for almost a full year, so that means they've seen everything from dusty July Whistler laps to hiking through the snow to get like a stupid lap in the middle of winter. And I can't say that these brakes have ever been anything but dialed. When set up right, the Hope Tech 4 V4s with the vented rotors have given me some of the best performance I've gotten with any brake, with loads of power that directly translates to control on the trail. The only thing limiting my brake power was the grip for my tires, and I would always be running out of traction before running out of braking power. That's exactly why modulation is way more important than all-out power, and the Tech 4 V4s have all the modulation I need to creep down wet rock slabs in the winter and slow down over skittery hard pack in the summer. The lever action on these brakes is super linear, and there's no added resistance anywhere in the stroke, which is what I think gives a brake good modulation. Something like a Shimano Saint is known for that on-off feeling, which comes from that little hump of resistance in the lever that you have to overcome before they bite. Once you're applying a certain amount of power to the lever and overcome that hump, all that power gets thrown right into the brakes instead of a slower buildup, which gives the illusion of like a more powerful brake at the expense of modulation. Of the brakes I've tried, the Hopes, Hayes, and TRPs are all on pretty similar footing here with completely linear lever throws that make for great modulation. But of those three, the Hopes do feel like they have the best modulation because they just don't come on quite as strong as the other two, and they give a slightly softer initial bite. When you keep pulling for more power after that bite point, there isn't really a hard stop in the travel, and instead you slowly ease into the stroke and build power super predictably and quickly. There's enough power so that even though you do move deeper into the stroke when you keep pulling the lever, you don't need to pull the lever that much farther to get all the power that you need. So when you get the chance to squeeze these brakes in a bike shop or a parking lot somewhere, they might feel a little bit squishier than some other options, but the good news is that you never actually have to pull them hard enough to get into that squishy part of the lever throw when you're riding them. While the Tech 4 V4 brake itself is a phenomenal product, I'm actually more excited about the 3.3 mil vented rotors and how much of a difference they make on the trail. Initially, I ran the SRAM HS2 rotors because that's what I've been running on all the other brakes I've tested just to standardize my whole experience, and I was surprised to see a big performance improvement when I switched over to the thicker 3.3 mil vented rotors. Last summer, I rode at the Sun Peaks Bike Park one weekend with these Hope brakes and the HS2 rotors and got a really good idea as to where my brakes start to heat up and pump out after I do a bunch of runs on some of their downhill tracks, which I have to say, they're crazy good. They got great trails over there, pretty underrated, super recommended if you've never been to Sun Peaks. And then I actually went back the next weekend with these thick boys spinning between my calipers, and I would get noticeably farther down the trail before there was any change in my lever feel. Hope says that these stay 15% cooler than the standard rotors, but I was definitely getting more than 15% further down the trail before my brakes started cooking, which I don't know about you guys, but I think that's a pretty huge performance difference from just switching out some brake rotors. I can imagine if you're either a heavier person or in a big heavy e-bike consistently generating tons of heat in your brakes, then this brake and rotor setup could actually make a big difference in how consistent your brakes are and how confident you can feel on those long descents, especially at like a bike park. I'd be curious to try these rotors on some other brakes like the Mavens or the Dominions. I think the limiting factor is whether or not the rotors are gonna fit in between the brake pads when you've got, fresh brake pads on there. I don't think they would. Maybe they would. Kind of hard to say without trying it out, but I can't really recommend that you try that. All right, we just tried to fit a few brake calipers on the Hope 3.3 mil vented rotors. None of them fit. Here's the TRP. This one had like the best chance of fitting because it's made for thicker rotors, but no, it's not even close. It won't fit. Strictly V4 calipers.
What'd you say?
Strictly V4 calipers. It says it right here, man.
Oh yeah, okay.
V4. My only gripe with this brake setup is how particular they are about having a perfect bleed, and that my bleeds haven't really kept that crisp, fresh feeling for quite as long as I'd like. Even with the great bleed, the bite point in the lever is a little bit squishy, so when there are any bubbles in the system, it's immediately noticeable, and I would end up having to pump them up like the whole way down the trail, kind of like when a Shimano brake gets that wandering bite point, and you're kind of just working to keep them in the same place the whole time down the trail. All of the bubbles that entered the system would get in through the caliper, which actually made getting them out pretty easy with a quick gravity bleed. And I found myself giving them a little maintenance bleed every couple months of consistent riding. That's not too dissimilar to other brakes, maybe 50% more often than a TRP or a Hayes brake, but it's also less often than I would bleed a Shimano brake to keep those feeling fresh. So I guess it's time to answer the question way back from the start of the video, are these the best mountain bike brakes money can buy right now? Well, we're in a great place with all the other high-end brakes on offer right now, and I would be totally happy to run any of the brakes from SRAM, TRP, Hayes, Magura, or Hope, but these Hopes are definitely one of my favorites. I would say they have the second best power after the Mavens, the second best lever feel after the Hayes Dominions, and the overall best lever adjustments. And they've also got the most consistent performance when you've got the vented rotors on there. That consistency makes them my #1 recommendation for people who ride e-bikes hard, because those heavier bikes just need incredibly powerful and fade-resistant brakes, which is exactly what the Hope Tech 4 V4 with the vented rotors are. I also have to mention again how cool the machine finish is on these brakes. There's really nothing else like them in the looks department, which, I don't know, that matters for something, right? Especially if you come from a moto background and you just kind of like that aesthetic, these brakes look like they could have been pulled straight off of 450 and just installed right on your mountain bike. The only downside of these brakes is the price, and they're just about the most expensive brake setup you can get when you've got the vented rotors. Well, that's besides some bougie options like trick stuff or intent. The total price for this brake set comes out to a little bit over $900. And if I were spending my own money, I would be looking at the more affordable Hayes Dominion A4s with the SRAM HS2 rotors for just $520. And they offer a very similar level of performance and obviously quite a bit more value. I go back and forth between which of these two brakes is my favorite. I've got the Hopes here on my trail bike, as you can see, and the Dominions on the downhill bike. And I gotta say, I'm really stoked on both of them, but just because of the price difference, I would have to recommend the Hayes Dominion A4s to most riders. But if you're someone who's looking for incredibly high-performing, blinged-out bike part, the Hope Tech 4 V4s come in a whole bunch of bright colors to match any kind of color theme that your bike has going on, and they're guaranteed to stay cooler on big descents that cook brakes to a crisp when you're using a Hope 3.3 vented rotors. That's it. That's everything that I've learned after running the Hope Tech 4 V4s for the last year. And let me know what you think down in the comments. Is the super premium finish and performance of these brakes worth it? Or are you gonna save a few bucks and go for another option? There's a lot of great options out there, and yeah, let me know what you think. We carry all the products that we talked about in the video today, as well as everything else that you can need for your mountain bike over at thelostco.com. We offer free shipping in the United States on orders over $49. And yeah, go get yourself some fresh bike parts. Thanks for watching the video. Hit the subscribe to see more, and see you next time.